Welcome, everyone, to our LinkedIn Live. I'm Bruce Eckfeldt. I'm going to do a little intro. I'll intro our guests here, and then we'll get into our topics. Today's panel, today's LinkedIn Live, we're going to be focused on conflict, and specifically conflict on leadership teams and how to handle it. And we're going to talk about the difference between constructive and destructive conflict, talk a little bit about psychological safety, how to really foster communications, look for behaviors, like what do we see on leadership teams that we look out for? How do we kind of manage those things, strategies we use to really get people into constructive, healthy debate? And really, how do we coach teams and individuals on leadership teams? Excited for this. This is a topic that we run into a lot, and it can be a really challenging one. So hopefully, if you're a leader in these teams, you're going to get a little bit of insight, hopefully some ideas, maybe a couple nuggets you can take away. So hopefully you'll find a little value. We're recording this, obviously, so if you are watching the recorded version, obviously you won't be able to make comments. But if you're live here with us, you can throw comments in the chat on LinkedIn. We'll be watching that as we go. If there's questions there that we see, we'll try to work them into the conversation. If you are on YouTube, jump over to LinkedIn if you want to make comments or ask questions. We'll be watching that as we go. So that is our setup. Let me introduce our guests. First guest, Elena Goto. She is an experienced conflict resolution consultant, over 14 years in experience in performance management, mediation, communication, coaching, really dedicated herself to helping organizations navigate conflict, enhance team dynamics, fostering inclusion, and making her valuable and looking forward to hearing her comments in today's discussion. Elena, thank you so much for being here today.
Thanks, Bruce. I'm happy to be here.
Yeah. Second panelist, Matt Stone. Matt is CEO of Behavioral OS, and he's a leadership consultant and coach working on fixing friction on leadership teams so they can collaborate more effectively, helping lead change inside organizations, really focused on trust building, open dialogue, self-awareness. He's worked with countless leaders to help navigate complex team dynamics, really fostering high-performance cultures, and really around communication and accountability. Really interesting work that Matt has been doing. Matt, thank you so much for being here today.
Thanks for the invite, Bruce. Great to be with you and Helena.
Yeah, it's a pleasure. And then I'm Bruce Eckfeldt. I'm a strategic leadership coach. I help companies scale and exit, hopefully a little faster, hopefully with a little less drama. Really, my experience as a founder and CEO and having worked with dozens of companies on this is really my focus, and my passion is working with leadership teams on how they create strategies, help them grow, and help achieve long-term sustainable success. So those are introductions. Let's get into the topics. The question I want to kick us off with, and I'll have you each just kind of give your thoughts on this, is this whole idea of constructive versus destructive conflict. I think a lot of times or a lot of people sort of see conflict as a bad thing in general. And I think as you get into this, you realize that conflict in itself is not necessarily bad, but there's nuance here, and there's a really difference. So would love to hear from each of you, like how do you kind of define or distinguish between constructive versus destructive conflict? And then we'll kind of go from there. So Elena, why don't we start with you? Give me your thoughts on this topic and how do you distinguish?
Okay, well, all conflict can be constructive or destructive, depending on how it is dealt with. And when there's conflict, typically there's a breakdown. And so the relationship starts to go like this. And when it's destructive conflict, it continues to go like this. And if you're not watching this, my hands are separating. But in the gap, there's a massive breakdown in trust.
Yeah.
And that's when it starts to get personal and it starts to be really destructive. When it's dealt with, constructively, people communicate, they work their way through it, and they come back together. And I actually feel when you do that, that conflict creates such an opportunity for increasing trust and really innovation and really building a really strong platform foundation for relationships to work their way through ongoing, disagreements or breakdowns. So I think conflict can be incredibly valuable when it's dealt with constructively.
Yeah. A bunch of things I want to talk about in there, but I want to hear Matt's take on this first. Matt, how do you kind of tease apart this constructive versus destructive conflict?
Well, building off of what Helena said, totally agree with that. and I really respect her as an expert in this field and collaborate with her quite frequently on a lot of difficult projects. And one of the other aspects of it is kind of the signs that you look for is whether or not there's dehumanization going on. So when you hear things like, that person is whatever, that's really destructive, because to her point about relationships, when people are speaking about one another, usually indirectly, sometimes directly, in a dehumanizing way, that's a sign that it is going to be destructive, because without trust, there's no path forward to build something better than what is, to go to a positive future. And you might win the battle and lose the war, right? So
Yeah.
I just want to lean into that relationship. Relationships are strengthened through conflict when it's done right, or they're destroyed. And if you don't have the relationships, you don't have the potential to move forward.
Yeah. Yeah. I run in, I think in some of our prep calls, I may have mentioned this. I tend to find myself introducing a lot of conflict on leadership teams, meaning I usually run in these situations where everyone's playing really nice, right? And, everyone's trying to tiptoe around things, or, they're so focused on not kind of tipping the apple cart on anything that we don't really get into the issues that we need to get into. So a lot of times I'm finding this kind of destructive, or constructive conflict is really, well, we need to start talking about stuff. Now, how we talk about it can be important, but not talking about it is not doing us any favors. I'm curious, Helena, you mentioned this, or maybe it was in your hand gestures here that I was seeing, this idea of kind of a cycle of going through kind of periods of conflict and periods of repair as being kind of part of the process. I'd be curious to hear a little bit more about that. Like what does this cycle look like? Or if it's cyclical, what is the cycle, and how do you notice the cycle, and how do you manage the cycle?
So to Matt's point about dehumanizing each other, and that's the cycle of when it's going apart. And it's very easy to dehumanize people today, given how there's so much more distance between us. We're a lot of the time not in the same office. We're able to text and email, and you know what it's like when you've got someone who the things that people will say to each other online as opposed to what they'll say to the person in person is radically different. And that's the process of humanizing them is making them come back together. And when you're saying, I bring in the conflict, what you're doing is you're bringing the people in the room to have the conversations that they're avoiding.
Yeah.
So that's the cycle. And I think what's key about it is that when you don't do that, there is no cycle. The cycle is this. There's no coming back together. That has to be facilitated, and there has to be an environment that allows for that. And if there's not trust, if there's not that psychological safety, it doesn't happen.
Yeah.
And so when you say you go into a place where people are tiptoeing around and just being nice, that's because the leader has not created an environment where people feel safe and feel that they're able to really be honest. And it's not a safe environment. So it's repairing that trust that then builds the environment for people to be able to have that kind of discourse that you're speaking about.
Yeah. It's funny. I just think of I can't tell you the number of times I get emails from the CEOs that I coach, forwarded emails from other people. So they get an email from one of their directs, and they draft the response and they send it to me first. I say, so I'm thinking about sending this. Yeah. And the first thing I say is, this is not an email. No. At a minimum, you need to get on the phone. Ideally, you need to go walk into their office. The problem is a lot of times they're not physically co-located. So, but it's amazing what people are willing to say on, and even worse is text.
And that is such a key. It's such an easy, simple fix, but it's just pick up the phone or go and sit with the person. If you just stopped before you sent that email, it would really de-escalate the situation.
Yeah. Well, I think you were both mentioning the whole kind of dehumanization process that comes with email is I think rife in general and in communities, but certainly in business, and I think on leadership's team too much.
I want to, sorry, Bruce, I just wanted to add one thing to that, because this is really important. One of the things that I hear a lot, and I'm sure you do too, is I don't have time to do all this extra conversation or whatever. And I think about the fact that humans are dynamic, as is the world. We're learning, in real time. things don't stay the same. Life is dynamic. Relationships are dynamic. They're always changing. So to Helena's point, your relationships are either going apart or they're coming together at any given time.
Mhm.
So the more avoidance that you're practicing, you're ensuring that maybe you're not going to have a conflict today, an outward conflict, but you're ensuring a much bigger one later. Because if you're moving apart, when that friction, when that thing happens, it's going to ignite a much bigger problem than it would be if you were taking the time to invest in non-avoidance behaviors,
Yeah.
talking through those things. And so
Yeah.
building muscle,
Yeah.
building strength as a bend, don't break, kind of methodology with your people that you can get through anything together.
Yeah. Well, and I love that idea that, it's like working out, right? Like you got to start with light weights, right? And you got to, 8 reps 3 times for a couple of weeks, and then you can start adding weight. But unless you do the low reps, right? Unless you start lower and starts building rep and building up the muscle tissue and letting it, fail in a controlled way and then rebuild stronger, right? Like that's what team, performance is about, right? You can't actually tackle the really big, hairy issues until you've built up to it, until you've built the patterns, you build the trust, you build kind of the protocols around this to be able to then handle the big ones. I think you both mentioned psychological safety. I'd love to kind of dig into this a little bit. Like what is psychological safety, or how do you kind of think about psychological safety? And then how do you kind of assess, and then what do you do to increase psychological safety on teams? And I'll let either one of you kind of kick us off on this, but I think this is a really important topic for most leadership teams.
I'm happy to go.
Go for it.
Yeah, go for it, Helena.
So, psychological safety basically is that there's trust on the team, and the level of trust, I think, is directly related to the mental health of a team. And when people talk about mental health, we think about mental illness, really, as opposed to, when you think about fitness, you don't think of illness, you think about someone being fit. So physical well-being, we think about that's been pushed in the workplace. Now they're pushing mental health. Well, mental health, I think, is directly proportional to psychological safety. When you go into your office, you feel you can just communicate. And the difference, and I love this analogy between when you're sick, you suddenly think, or you have a sore back, everything is hard, and you all these things that you just do so easily are suddenly exponentially difficult, and it's awful. And I think it's the same with psychological safety, mental health, trust. If it's not in the workplace, things that were just so easy, just communicating through something, collaborating, become exponentially difficult. People are trying to work out, how do I say that? Like I'm rewriting my email 5 times. I'm not sure whether I should call. So I think that's how I think about psychological safety, is what is the level of trust and the level of health in your collective group.
Yeah. Matt, your thoughts on this?
I'm thinking back that really resonates. And I'm thinking back to what one of my key mentors taught me. The legal name of my company is actually Temenos. We go by Behavioral OS as a trade name, but Temenos. And a Temenos is a Greek name for a safe space to learn and grow, And I think what I look for on a team is, are people willing to take risks for the sake of learning and growth? Are they afraid of the right things and unafraid of everything else? There's certain things we should be afraid of, right? Fear is a healthy thing, as are all the emotions. But I shouldn't be afraid of making mistakes to the point where I'm paralyzed or I'm aggressive, passive aggressive behavior is one of the biggest signs of conflict on a team, right? Passive aggressive. It's passive, but it's aggressive. And so really, if we're not growing, what are we doing?
Yeah.
We're Kodak.
Yeah.
If we're not growing, we're Sears. We are, we're either learning and growing and adapting, or we are going extinct, however slowly or quickly. And I think the thing on leadership teams today is we need to be better at the growth thing and faster at the growth and adaptation thing. And that's going to require a high level of psychological safety. But that does not mean that we're not accountable for mistakes. It just means I'm not terrified of making them.
Yeah.
And I'm willing to reach out.
Yeah.
There's got to be an incentive structure that was a good mistake I made because I was investing in the right area. I just didn't get it quite right. I've learned I'm not going to make that mistake again. Together, we're going to do the right thing the next time.
So I want to dig into that. I was going to say one of the things I look for on leadership teams is how willing is an individual to put a risky idea on the table. But basically, how willing are they to be vulnerable, right? Like put something on there that might expose them to just might expose them. It could be in different ways, but how well they're willing to stand there and actually put something on the table that makes them potentially susceptible to attack, or someone could use it to leverage them. And are they willing to do it? And then how does the team respond? Right. And the passive aggressive one is a classic one. I mean, I see this all the time. It's like, well, we could do, I really think we should do ABC, but I'm fine going with that otherwise. Right. And they kind of slip this dissent in, but then like shut down the discussion around it. And it is such a, difficult one to kind of unpack, because it's a hard one for teams to kind of see. But it is for me, it's always a sign for, okay, we've got a lot of work to do on this team, because if people are not afraid, they won't just sit with the putting the issues on the table. They have to kind of soft pedal it and then quickly move on and try to move the conversation forward. It's like they're not safe. Like they know they need to say something, but they don't feel safe putting it out there and just talking about it.
So Bruce, when you see that on a team, what methodologies or what tactics have you found to be successful working with the team leader to kind of, maybe the team leader is a little blind to how they're contributing to that, they're modeling behavior that's creating that culture? Yeah. What have you found to be, I don't mean to flip the script on you.
Yeah, no, it's a good one. So it kind of depends on what I know about the leader and where I am with the team and the process. If I've worked with them for a little while and I've got a reasonable rapport with the leader, it's usually about having them ask questions about that situation and actually digging into it and kind of taking it on in a safe and comfortable way, and create space for that person to actually start talking about what it is. They, if they have an issue with this, okay, well, let's get into it. Like, tell me more about what's happening with this. Like, what is the background? What evidence? What story, or what is the background to the situation? I want to learn. I want to be curious. I want to learn more. Like, if I can get them into that mode, it starts to create some space. I hate to say it, most of the time the leaders, the power is not listening very well. Right. It's that they have not created a conduit to be able to hear what's going on. And they don't even need to respond to it a lot of the times. They just need to create a space to be able to get a voice, to open up and actually put that stuff on the table is usually my first step.
I want to jump on that if you don't mind. And please. When you said they're not feeling heard. And the trick with that is that people can't listen until they feel heard. Mm-hmm. So the leader's not being listened to because their people are not being listened to. Yeah. So somebody has to start, and obviously the leader is the one. And I think that it's difficult to do that. And so I think that's when someone like yourself comes in, because you're able to listen to the leader, get them sort of in that space to now reciprocate and listen to their people. Yeah. That listening piece is, whenever I go into a place that there's a lot of conflict, there's a lot of like pre-listening that has to happen before people can really sit in the room and have a conversation that they can hear what the other person is saying.
It's funny. Most of the engagements when I work with a new team, I have one-on-one calls. I mean, I'm oftentimes flying in, and I haven't met them otherwise, or sometimes they haven't even met themselves or each other sometimes. But I'll do a 60-minute call with every single leader on the team, where I just listen, right? Like they just tell me what's going on. What else should I know, right? And most of the reason I do it is just so they can feel like they've put stuff out there. They feel heard, right? Mm-hmm. I build rapport and connection. So then when I get in the room, at least with me, like they've got some level of ability to communicate, and then hopefully that sets it up for the team. We can start working on it there. But yeah, no, it's a great point. Matt, you mentioned this experimentation and safety. I'd love to dig into that a little bit more. So maybe give us a little bit more on that in terms of when you talk about safety for experimenting and learning and growing. Like what does that really look like in leadership teams, and how do you, I guess, how do you see it, and then what would you do to create more of it on teams?
Well, a lot of it has to do with intention. So in my experience, how we go into a feedback conversation, a difficult conversation, a crucial conversation, whatever you want to call it, radical honesty, whatever, is my intention. And so one of the techniques that I found to be really useful is in setting objectives, but doing it differently than what a lot of people are used to. So I'll sit down, let's say, with the top leader, and we'll set out the objectives. But when you think of an objective, you think of what I want to have happen, right? And this is why a lot of the conversation gets shut down, is because the top person is thinking about driving, executing, pushing. It's a pushing energy. It's like, oh yeah, I'm listening. But behind that listening is, you better do what I want you to do. Right.
Yeah.
So I hear the words, but it doesn't match the energy. That's a mixed message. So I'm going to basically withhold from you. Or I might fight you, but most people will just withhold. And now you don't have a free flow of information. So how do you change that energy dynamic so that I feel free to offer information and ask safely? And I know that my ideas may get shot down, but I also know that it'll be worth it, to your earlier point.
Yeah.
And one of those things starts with setting distinct task objectives from relationship objectives, making the relationships themselves worthy of separate objectives.
Mm-hmm.
So a task objective is what I want to take away from this. I want clarity on what you think. I want to execute the plan. I want you, Bruce, to do X, Y, Z. I want Helena to see my brilliant vision, right? And be inspired. But that's self-centered. That's what I want.
Mm-hmm.
If I'm going to have the right intention, I need to zone in on my relationship objective, which is to do the best that I can to put myself in your shoes from a heart level and say, what is the heartfelt impression that I would want Bruce to have of me as a result of this initiative, interaction, meeting, whatever?
Yeah.
And I find that to be actually very hard for people to do, to articulate it. But when we can get there, it implants that intention that there is a worthiness to my relationship objective, separate and apart from the business objectives. Because they feed the business execution. And I don't know if that makes sense, but that's really key to framing it so that, why am I doing it this way? Because our relationship matters enough.
Yeah.
So when I go into, I'm preparing somebody to go into a difficult conversation, I ask them to answer for themselves, what do I want for myself? What do I want for the other person? And what do I want for us, for our relationship? So it's kind of a similar process.
Yeah.
And because when you're in conflict and it's a difficult conversation, it's easy to, and I forgot the last bit of that. And how would I act if those things were true? Right? You think about that. And so then when you're in the conversation and you're not acting that way, you're like, oh, hang on a minute. Let me go back to what it is that I want. And him and me. Yeah.
I'll not to go too woo on this.
What?
Say it again.
I was going to say, Bruce,
it's funny. What's coming up for me is it might be a little woo woo, but I this was maybe 3 years ago. I got into this whole like attachment theory and relationships and early childhood and stuff, and I realized we do this on these leadership teams where we have all this kind of verbal, cognitive, left brain kind of things that we're trying to communicate, but what I've found is that really good leaders in these situations have this ability to kind of connect on an energy level, and not an energy like aura level, but an energy in terms of like, what is the nature, what is the tone of the conversation? And if the person they're speaking to is in a highly agitated state, their ability to kind of match them on the agitated state and start moving them down into a more regulated state. Or if they're in almost a disassociated state, if they feel them kind of emotionally withdrawing from the conversation, they're still talking, but there's something about it's their body language, it's the tone of their voice, there's some ability they have to be able to kind of match them or connect with them and start moving them back up into an engaged state. And there's something about this being able to kind of see that, and it's not even conscious. I don't think they're even thinking about it, but their ability to kind of attune to the person they're talking to or the energy of the room, and to kind of help manage that while they're also kind of communicating the content is a really fascinating dynamic. It's just something that's come up for me the last year or so as I've worked with these teams.
I'm really excited to jump in here.
Yeah,
So,
go.
what I've recently come to realize is that what you're talking about is the interface between people.
Yeah.
And I think minimizing the friction in that interface, like that's what you're talking about. A really good leader is able to just create that fluid exchange. They're able to just, whereas when you don't have that ability, there's so much friction from what I'm saying
Yeah.
to what the person is hearing. And that is the value today. Information is everywhere.
Yeah, exactly.
So it's really about how do you, the interface between people, that's going to be so vital in the coming years with how we all communicate. And I think you're right. A great leader is able to just get into like, what does that person need from me right now without it being too intellectual.
It can't be if they intellectualize it. They can't do it anymore, right? That has to. There's always these kind of two levels of the conversation. Matt, you're talking some of this stuff.
Yeah. I mean, if you intellectualize it too much, it's like ignoring the emotional elephant in the room.
Yeah.
And then, you might get through it, but you never really got to what's sometimes the best thing to do is agree to walk away and revisit, to come back and say, what you were saying, Bruce, really great, both of you. But what I was thinking was it is, yes, a feeling you have, but there's also a skill of observation and being detached from the judgment of it, because we're so quick to judge what our observations mean. So sometimes when you can say, oh, I'm looking at your face and I'm looking at the creases in your eyebrow. Like I've literally said this. I noticed that your brow is furrowed at the moment.
Yeah.
Well, how should I interpret that? And then we go, oh, really? And sometimes we'll say, oh, really? I didn't know. Oh, yeah. I guess I'm feeling stressed about my child's, baseball game that is, might get canceled from rain. And then it just lets them, it can be something as simple, maybe consequential as that, but getting that out.
Yeah.
But you start with observation without judgment.
Yeah.
And then it allows you to call out what is this space that we're in? What's interfering with it? And it might be something that we can easily park, and it might be something so big that we realize, we're not ready to have the conversation we're about to have.
Yeah.
And both are powerful.
Yeah, I wanted to kind of I guess double click on that one a little bit in terms of that whole idea of the space. What is the I do a lot of men's work. We talk about containers, right? Getting containers for doing our work and stuff. But like, what are the elements for each of you in terms of creating kind of that environment, container, whether it's physical, whether it's emotional, psychological? Like, what are some things that you're looking for, or things that you're noticing, or things that you do to help create a space to actually have good, healthy, constructive conflict and on teams or with leaders? Any thoughts on that one?
I'm just going to jump in since I'm already, my pipes are warmed up, and
Go
then
for
I
it.
know Helena's going to make it better, whatever it is. I think one key element, it's not the whole thing, is really setting it up right. So no surprises. You're not like, oh, hey, let's have coffee, and then dump some big thing on them. Like it should not
Performance
be a
review right there. Yeah.
Yeah. No surprises if at all. And if you're surprised by something coming up, it's okay to just take a deep breath and go, oh gosh, I didn't expect to be thinking or talking about this right now. Let me think about whether or not this, and then have a discussion about whether it's the right time. But I think surprises can be deadly, because then you're unprepared to be at your best to create that space. And if that space gets ruined, it can actually ruin a relationship. So that's one piece.
Yeah. And then I think in the conversation, just being curious. setting people up to just assume best intentions and just be curious, trying to understand, like help me understand, staying in that state. And also really seeing that we're a human first, right? So seeing the person and the person feeling like you're seeing them as a human being is really important.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm thinking one of the things I do, I generally run these kind of retreat format or intensive format. So I'm working with a team for, usually a couple of days. I start pretty much all of these with some kind of game, right? And I have a whole series of these kind of games that I do. But and one of the reasons I do it is because I want them to have a sort of intense interaction experience, which is fun.
Mm-hmm.
And it just, I don't know if it creates some kind of neurochemistry or something, or something. It allows me to kind of see how they interact, pretty quickly, and I can kind of diagnose a lot of things, or at least understand kind of the dynamics. But for them, it gets them out of their normal kind of thinking patterns and interaction patterns, and it creates this kind of fun. And invariably they reflect on the game and make all these parallels to what they're trying to do in the business and how they work as a team. It's like, oh yeah, Bob always he's had to take control, and so-and-so always wants to jump in right away, and so-and-so always sort of steps back. But they almost make fun of themselves. But in the process, they become super aware of the patterns they're in and kind of the behaviors and the tendencies they have. And because it's in this kind of play, fun context, they can play with it. Like they can literally start seeing it, because it's kind of the intensity is kind of brought down, or the severity of things is brought down, but they see it and they apply it in the games. And then they often refer to the game throughout the session. Like, oh, that's just like when you were trying to play those cards and like it didn't work and we all got mad. Yeah, that's one of those cases again. So I'm looking at the time and we're already at past 30 minutes here. So I'm going to wrap us up. I'd love for each of you to just kind of give some information on, if people want to get more information on you, the work that you do. How do we get that? Elena, why don't you kick us off on that? What's the best way to contact you and get more information?
I'm pretty active on LinkedIn, so just pinging me on LinkedIn works. I pretty much come in and brought in when there's the conflict has not been dealt with early on.
Yeah.
So people are kind of here,
Yeah.
and I'm brought in to kind of bring everybody back here. So if anyone's got that going on, reach out.
Perfect. I'll make sure that on YouTube as well, I'll make sure that your LinkedIn profile is there so people can get that. Matt, if people want to find out more about you, the work that you're doing, what's the best way to get that information?
Well, of course, same for me. LinkedIn is great. Find me, Matt Stone. Look for Behavioral OS, and you'll find me there. And our website's behavioralos.com. Even if you spell it the English way, with add an O, an extra vowel, you'll still find it. I've got all those domains. And I try and share content semi-regularly as well. So we really all are trying to help. All of us here are trying to help humanize to increase performance and satisfaction, right? So we all win, because I think ultimately it's win-win or lose-lose. There isn't really a win-lose in the long run.
Yeah, exactly.
So we all need each other. So thanks again for this opportunity. It's been a great 30 minutes.
Yeah, no, it's been fun. Yeah, I'll make sure all your information is there. If people want to get a hold of me, just bruce@eckfeldt.com is my email. Eckfeldt.com is my website. You can get all my podcasts and newsletters and things that I do, and I'm very active on LinkedIn as well. So check that out. So Elena, Matt, thank you so much for taking the time today. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks, Bruce.
Thank you both.